Welcome to Campfire Chronicles, episode 21. This is Andrew speaking, and today we have a little something different. Basically, I wanted to start having guests onto the podcast because I figured after like 20 episodes, you all might get a little bit sick of hearing the four of us ramble on about whatever, and maybe you don't. But either way, I'm hoping to start having guests occasionally on our podcasts just to change things up and to hear different perspectives of people who enjoy nature or relate to the wilderness somehow. So today we have Becca Pollard, who is a founding member of Keep Wayne Wild, which is an organization in Ohio that's concerned with how natural gas extraction might affect the environment in Wayne National Forest. And I mean, I think this is something that a lot of us can relate to as outdoors enthusiasts and backpackers and whatever we may be. Because you don't want to go to a forest and find that like biodiversity has decreased or that the environment has been wrecked or that the water's not clean anymore. So, I hope you enjoy this conversation, and hopefully we can have more guests on with more interesting stories and perspectives. Before we get into it, remember to check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/adventure. You can sign up and support our channel, join a community where we're posting lots of weekly live streams, weekly updates. You get early access to all the episodes and behind the scenes content like bloopers and commentary for all the episodes. So sign up there. Thank you for listening. And without further ado, here's the conversation. So I guess I'm curious like how you got into Keep Wayne Wild to begin with.
Well, I grew up in central Ohio, and I actually never went to the Wayne National Forest growing up. I did visit other hiking areas, other natural areas around the state, including some in southeastern Ohio, like Hocking Hills, obviously. But I didn't even know we had a national forest growing up here.
For sure. Yeah.
But in 2004, I moved to Oregon, and I lived out there for 12 years, and there are a lot of really amazing forests out there.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people would be jealous of anyone who lives out there. But.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of just kind of opened my eyes to the value of living near old-growth forests, like, expansive, healthy forests where there's a lot of recreation areas and a lot of wildlife and, places where you can hike for a long time without seeing a road or, hearing traffic or being around industry. So I think that helped me to really gain an appreciation for what national forests can be like. And then I moved back here a little over a year ago, and right when I moved back, I heard the announcement that the Bureau of Land Management was planning to auction off Wayne National Forest for gas and oil development.
For sure.
And specifically for unconventional fracking, because they've been doing vertical drilling in the Wayne for a long time. Which is much more invasive and takes a lot more resources. So I was pretty concerned when I heard about that. And so, the first thing I did was I just drove down there and took a hike. I was just like, I want to go see what this place is about. And I was like, this...
You hadn't been down there before or anything?
No, I'd been kind of to that area, but I hadn't been in the Wayne before. And so I just kind of went down and I was like, this is pretty and it's a natural area and there's not very much of this around here and we should really protect what we've got. So I went to an informational meeting here in Columbus. I think it was maybe last January.
Okay.
And through that meeting, I got in touch with some other local people who were really concerned about the same issue, and we started Keep Wayne Wild.
That's awesome. Okay. So the group is like about a year old now, or?
Yeah, I think some people were already like doing some like petitioning and things before then, but I think we kind of formally became a group and started a website and all that stuff in February of last year.
Okay, sweet. Well, before we get into all that, I'm curious if you when you were in Oregon, did you do any like backpacking or camping?
Or quite a bit. And they're like, I think 11 national forests in Oregon. And so I visited a lot of them and also some in Washington, Gifford Pinchot National Forest in southern Washington is probably my favorite. I went backpacking there quite a few times.
Is that where like the rainforests and stuff are?
There's a lot of subtropical rainforests in that area, and I think most of them in that region, like the western Washington and Oregon area, are technically rainforests. Like they're like really big trees and lots of ferns. And
I knew someone who lived out in like the Cave Junction area. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I don't think so.
I forget where exactly it is, but they were a park ranger in that area for a while,
cool.
but did a lot of caving. But.
Yeah, there are a lot of caves, especially in Washington, like in the Gifford-Pinchot area. Like that's the same area where Mount St. Helens is.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big park called Ape Caves there that's pretty popular, but there are also a lot of lesser-known caves that people like to go explore.
That's cool. So yeah, I don't know. I guess getting back on the whole fracking thing, like you said, you grew up in Ohio. Was it in these sort of Appalachian areas where a lot of this is happening?
No, I grew up in central Ohio.
Oh, okay, so like around here.
So I wasn't too familiar with that area. I mean, I had been down to Hocking Hills and some other places in southern Ohio, but I had never spent a ton of time in Appalachian Ohio before. I'd been to other parts of Appalachia. My mom's originally from North Carolina, so we went down to that area quite a bit when I was a kid. But
so has been like participating in the group, has that made you sort of, I don't know, gain familiarity with the communities that are dealing with this from day to day?
Yeah.
And like what are their opinions, I guess? Because I feel like there's
it's really mixed.
Yeah.
We do have chapters of Keep Wayne Wild in Marietta and Athens, and we've got a small group of folks in Monroe County, which is the county where the majority of the parcels of Wayne National Forest that are being leased are. And
do you know which? Because there's like 3 chunks of Wayne.
Yeah, so it's the Marietta unit that is currently being leased by the Bureau of Land Management. There are other threats being posed to the other parts as well. Like the Ironton unit in particular, something to watch out for is the Buckeye Express pipeline, which I believe is currently in the process of getting permitted by FERC. So that's something we're keeping an eye on.
For sure.
But yeah, the fracking leases are happening in the Marietta unit, which is along the Ohio River right by West Virginia.
Okay. So I guess, I mean, when this fracking happens, like, has any already happened, or are they still leasing the land?
There's a lot of fracking happening in the area, and it's kind of a complex issue because the Wayne National Forest is a patchwork of public and private land. So there's a lot of privately owned land that has already been fracked inside of that boundary. So the public land is being leased a little bit at a time. There are currently 60,000 acres that are part of what they've been considering for lease. They've leased about 2,000 acres so far. There's another auction coming up on the 22nd of March for another, I think, 300 or so acres. But so far, no fracking has happened under the public land, but
under as in like even if it starts
so the pads, as far as I know, this is what I've been told anyways, the pads are all going to be on private land. We don't know this for sure, but this is at least what the messaging has been. But they drill under the public land because basically it's like the mineral rights that are being auctioned off. I can't. Did I answer your question? I can't remember.
No, yeah, totally. And I'm also kind of curious if, like, I mean, it sounds like they do this, but when they are trying to buy land to do fracking on the forest, like, it seems like they try to avoid places that would be more in the public eye. Like, I mean, is that accurate or?
Yeah, I think that is accurate. I think, they kind of treat that area like a sacrifice zone, and the same thing happens to communities in the area. But, it's a place where there isn't a large population. There isn't going to be as much pushback if they do something there where it's kind of out of sight from city folks like us.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas in the Athens unit, which is a little closer to Columbus and is a college town and, has, a little bit more known to the outdoors folks. I think, that's a more protected area, and when they try to do stuff there, there's a lot more pushback from the community. So, they do things like they've got a new bike trail that they're putting in the Athens unit, and they keep messaging that. Like, they post about that on their Facebook all the time.
Yeah.
This is the Wayne National Forest Facebook page. But they never mention the leasing. And they also don't mention opportunities for public input, which I think is pretty frustrating.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how much interaction you've had with communities down there, but in your experience, do you notice a pattern? Like, people who use the forest more, are they usually more against this, or?
I think it's a little more complicated in that area because a lot of people who do love and use the forest, they still live in a community where a lot of people are employed by Gas and Oil, and where Gas and Oil owns a lot of things and gives a lot of money to a lot of local programs. So I think people don't feel comfortable being as outspoken as they might in other areas like Columbus and Athens. Mm-hmm. But certainly there are people who are very concerned and very against it. Even some who have friends and family who work for Gas and Oil.
Yeah.
And, I think it's maybe something that they would speak about differently than people would in other areas, but there are a lot of people who aren't afraid to stand up and say, hey, this is the National Forest, this is not where we should be doing this. Like, even if they're not necessarily against fracking per se, a lot of people in the area feel that we should be
at least protecting the national forest.
Mm-hmm. And I think it is a really important issue because, Ohio used to be 90% forest, and, we depleted that to, I think, something like 10% about 100 years ago, and,
now it's
there's been
14.
some reforestation. I think it might even be as high as 30% now, but most of it's privately owned. So, we rank really low, both in terms of forested area and public land in Ohio. So, this is an important human rights issue in terms of access to natural areas, in terms of air quality and water quality, and globally in terms of climate change.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, I feel like there's so many different tiers.
I
mean, for one, just growing up as a kid in Ohio, for the longest time, I thought there was just really nowhere to go to, backpacking and camping is my main hobby. There's a book called Last Child in the Woods. I don't know if you've read it, but
no.
It's basically arguing that children who spend time in nature grow up healthier and also, grow up to appreciate nature more.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, but obviously there's also the whole global aspect. But yeah, and it's, I don't know, it's interesting to me that I feel like I would be worried as someone from Columbus, going into these communities, that I'd be perceived as an outsider trying to tell them what to do. But
I mean, we definitely tried to be mindful when we go into those communities, and it's not just people from Columbus going in there. We have founding members of our organization who are from Marietta, for example.
For sure.
So those are people who grew up in the area and grew up hiking in the Wayne, and want to work with people from around the state and around the region and really anywhere who are concerned about the issue, so that we can try to protect what they love,
So I guess have you, or has anyone brought up the sorts of impacts that fracking has already had on these areas, both in terms of just recreation, but also just in general, how it impacts the community or the environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that it impacts the area, both culturally and in terms of public health and the environment. I mean, just in the last month or so, there have been 2 natural gas explosions in southeast Ohio. And fortunately, no one was hurt in either of those, but, that still contaminates the air. So, that impacts people who live near there, and it didn't get much news coverage, unfortunately, and that's another big issue, is because it's not a big population center. These things often go ignored.
I mean, a lot of these places are already kind of marginalized regions, like Appalachian towns. Just
absolutely.
So I mean, one other thing I was thinking about is we've gone backpacking in Wayne National Forest, and I noticed that after it rained, the water turned really orange, and I've heard that there's a lot of history with coal
Mining.
extraction. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the water's almost, I don't know permanently, but just it's pretty much
Yeah,
damaged and undrinkable.
That's definitely true, and it's really unfortunate because, after living in Oregon and backpacking there and then coming back here, I'm like, wow, I have to carry all my own water because you're not supposed to drink the water in the Wayne.
Even through a filter, it's undrinkable.
Because you can't filter out all the contaminants. And I know that there have been some efforts from local groups to do restorations. I'm not sure how successful they've been, but I know Rural Action is one group that has been working on that, I think in the Athens unit of the Wayne National Forest. And I don't know if it's quite as bad in the Marietta unit, but I know that the Wayne National Forest website does say that you should not drink the water there.
Okay. See, I made a mistake because we did filter some of the water. And, well, hopefully one time we'll
well, I did the first time I backpacked there too. It was out of a small creek that looked pretty good, but it's hard to know.
Yeah. So I was reading that there's also a chance that this might open up in state parks in Ohio. Is that true? Or?
Yeah, and I apologize, I haven't been following that terribly closely lately. But my understanding is that back in, I want to say 2012, a committee was created to make decisions about leasing public state land, but Governor Kasich has never appointed anyone to the committee. So, by his inaction, he has, in a sense, been preventing it from happening. But last year, the state legislature proposed, I think they proposed a bill to take that right away from him so that they could appoint people to the committee instead. And I believe he vetoed it and they overturned his veto. And I can't remember exactly where that is now, but that's definitely a good thing to follow up on.
For sure, yeah.
But it's definitely a major issue for public land, both state and federal.
How would you argue to someone that they should care about this? Because I feel like when you look at outdoor recreation, you have people from all sorts of different areas of the political spectrum, and people who have different relationships with nature and stuff like that. And I guess is there anything you've learned talking to people from these communities that you think people should be aware of if they're hesitant to speaking out against this?
Well, I think it's important to consider that, for a lot of people, this is basically their backyard. What happens there impacts their community. It impacts people's water. The streams and rivers that run through the Wayne National Forest flow into the Ohio River, which is something like 5 million people's drinking water, including the city of Cincinnati. So people in Cincinnati should be concerned about that.
For sure.
A lot of people who live in the area, they don't just use it for recreation, for hiking and camping and whatnot, but they also do things like forage edible plants and mushrooms there. They hunt there. They teach their children to hunt there, and that's, part of their culture. I know a local hunter who lives in the town of Sardis, which is a town of 600 people on the Ohio River, right by the Wayne National Forest. And he's been hunting there since the 70s, and he taught his daughter to hunt in the Wayne. And
that's awesome. Yeah.
He's really passionate about protecting this area because, that's what he and his family do to, get away and for recreation, and it's.
I've even met people who subsist off of hunting, and that's just their lifestyle.
Right, and it's true for a lot of people.
And I know there have been cases of deer either getting sick from fracking fluid or being hit by cars because do they still pour the fracking fluid on the roads sometimes? Because
I know that they do in some places. I don't think they do in Ohio currently. They definitely don't in Columbus right now, but I know that there's been some push to start doing that. I'm not sure if they do it anywhere in Ohio.
Okay. But obviously it's a potential threat, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely is. The fracking fluid is extremely harmful to vegetation and animals. And there's an experimental forest in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia where
I just went there like last weekend.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. This area it's called Furneaux Experimental Forest. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but a few years ago they actually did a study on how vegetation is impacted by frack waste.
Okay.
And there were a ton of tree deaths in the area where they experimented with it. And they said, there's not enough data to apply what we saw here to any other forests. But it's like, okay, certainly there's enough to say, let's do more studies. Let's look at how this really impacts things before we allow it to happen in other places, especially someplace that's only about 100 miles away and it's the same type of forest.
Yeah, I found that, a lot of times, the nature of science is that you're trying to disprove things. You can't 100% prove anything. But I feel like when it comes to these sorts of environmental issues, the default for a lot of politicians is just to take inaction because there's no definitive link or something. And it's kind of frustrating. I also feel like just in general these sorts of things are they feel kind of nebulous sometimes. You were talking earlier about how Cincinnati's drinking water could be affected, but that just seems so distant for somebody living in Cincinnati. And
right.
I feel like a lot of people don't often think of these things in these sort of systemic ways. But I also feel like, I don't know, you have to bring it up, but also I feel like sometimes people connect to these issues the most when you're talking about how they relate to the forest, how they're enjoying it with recreation or whatever.
Right.
But I don't know. It's
and another thing about the Marietta unit, for people who like to do things like camping and backpacking, it's worth mentioning that the Marietta unit is the only unit of the Wayne that doesn't have any ATV trails.
Oh, okay.
So if you're trying to go someplace that's a little quieter and where there's less of that sort of disruption, then that's a really great place to go. Also,
is this off the top of your head? Do you know if this is where Lake Vesuvius is?
Lake Vesuvius is actually in the Ironton unit.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Is this where Wildcat
Hollow is in the Athens unit.
Okay.
And most of the better known places in the Wayne are not in the Marietta unit, but there are a few great ones like Archer's Fork Trail.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a 12 or 14 mile loop, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a great backpacking area. There's also a really great recreation area called Lamping Homestead, and there's a little lake with 6 campsites around it, and there's a hiking loop attached to it.
Okay.
And that's a really beautiful area that's actually inside one of the parcels that could potentially be leased for fracking.
Okay. So, are they focusing mostly on Marietta, do you think, because there are less well-known areas, or is that more of a geological issue? There's shale under there?
I don't know if I can speak definitively to that. I don't know exactly what the composition is, but it certainly is the area where they're going to get the least pushback because it's a little bit further away from population centers, and there's already so much gas and oil development in the area.
Well, I don't know. So, have you seen a change in people's attitudes in general? Do you think this is an issue that's gotten more or less attention in the last couple of years? Because
I just moved back to Ohio a little over a year ago, it was pretty off my radar prior to that. But I have to say, I see a lot of people becoming more and more concerned about climate change and about the loss of natural areas. So I think that, it's definitely a growing movement. And, there are people working on these issues all over the region, all over the country, and all over the world. And I think, the more we can connect with the other groups working on these issues and learn from each other and support each other's work, the better off we'll all be.
For sure. Yeah, I get the sense that, this is just my own personal perspective, but I feel like for a while there was a lot of activity and discussion about this issue, and then it kind of dropped off for a while. And now it seems like there's so many different things people are talking about that it's hard to focus in on one thing.
Yeah. It's definitely a tough one. I mean, there's so many important things people are fighting for right now. I think, that there can be kind of a lot of competition for space to talk about things. But, I think we also have to look at the interconnectedness between all of these issues because, it is a human rights issue. It's, an issue of economic disparity, and it's an issue of pollution and air quality and water quality and public health and the rights of the endangered species, and I think it's pretty complex. And then you also have to look at the economic issues in terms of gas and oil is kind of promoted as this savior that's going to come in and bring all these jobs to these poor communities, and
even the leases are often seen as this big economic boom. Like, you get a lot of money for leasing your land. Well,
there's some money that goes to schools and things, but it's really not a ton of money. It just might kind of sound like a lot if you're in an area that's pretty poor, but it's the leasing of the national forest is not going to pull Appalachian Ohio out of poverty. It's not, it's not a long-term solution. These are temporary jobs for the most part, and a lot of the workers are out of state. They bring in truckers from all over the country, and most of these companies are owned by people out of state. You have a lot of Texas-based companies coming in, and they're making money off of our resources. And one of the biggest issues is that they can actually pull the water from our rivers and streams for fracking, and it takes millions of gallons of water to frack a well. They don't have to pay for that water, so they're decimating these natural areas at no cost to them.
Yeah, what is the effect of that? I imagine any sort of water-dwelling species is gonna.
Yeah, and it's not something I've done a ton of research on specifically, but certainly if you're taking water out of these aquatic habitats, you're going to impact the species there, and there is a lot of wildlife that lives in that area. I mean, certainly a lot of the water is contaminated, but there are actually some high quality waterways in the Wayne as well. And there are salamanders and mussels and fish and a lot of other things that I don't know about because I'm not a biologist.
No, for sure. But I mean, I think in general, there's an understanding that all of these things are connected, and eventually it'll come back and bite us in the back.
Absolutely.
So you were talking about how these aren't temporary, or these aren't permanent or long-term solutions. Do you know more about that? When they do open up a new pad or something, I mean, how many people get employed and for how long?
I don't have statistics on that, but it's just a matter of the fact that these are not renewable resources. You frack a well and you get gas out of it, but then you frack it again, you get less the next time, and eventually it runs out, and then you eventually run out of the material. So,
and I imagine the impact it would have would also potentially do more harm than good.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly hurts property values, and I actually know a woman who taught biology in Monroe County, Ohio for 30 years. She owns a home there and was planning to retire there. She has decided she's not going to stay there. She's going to move back to Columbus, where she grew up, because she doesn't want to be in the middle of a frack zone. She says, when she's there, she can't even sleep at night because there's so much noise from the trucks.
Wow.
So
it's almost like a brain drain sort of issue.
Yeah. It's really sad.
Well, I mean, so what is the solution for these communities, I guess? Because I mean, I think a lot of people in those communities do see this as this economic boon, and it's hard to look into the long term when you're already living in an impoverished area.
Right. So, and I definitely think that that's a challenging issue to address, and I don't have all the solutions, but I think we need to think more long-term than just, this is going to provide some jobs right now. I think we have to think about, how is this going to impact the health of your community? How long can you even live there? How bad is it going to get? Aren't you worried about your water being contaminated? Aren't you worried about another pipeline explosion? What's that like for your kids? We certainly have other options for jobs. We just need to get there. There's more job growth in solar than in any other energy industry. So I think, we just need people in positions of power to make that a priority.
For sure.
Because right now, gas and oil is being subsidized so much, it's a lot easier for them to create high-paying jobs. But if we can, get everyone in alignment on focusing on what's really good for the future of our country and for the world, I think that we can get to where those renewable jobs will pay more and be more abundant. And, I know that there is a lot of movement, even in Appalachia, to bring more solar to the area. I know that there are some solar co-ops down there. If you go down to Athens, you'll see all the solar panels on the recreation center there. There are a number of businesses that are, trying to move in that direction. It's just, It's just taken a while.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I was thinking about how a lot of the initial, the birth of the environmental movement, hundreds of years ago, a lot of it had to do with people who are hunting animals and not what we usually associate with environmentalists today. So I'm hoping that people in these communities who are really connected to the land will also start. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them already are. That's kind of pretentious of me to say that, but I mean, I think
what we perceive as being the traditional environmentalist, I think we have to get past that, because it doesn't matter whether someone calls himself an environmentalist or not, or whether they're a vegan or someone who hunts all the time and eats deer meat. I think we really need to look at the impacts of ruining our environment and how that impacts everyone. We need to consider what we're losing, and that impacts you whether you're an environmentalist or not. So, it's not really... I think it's becoming less of a cultural divide between necessarily the hippies and...
I was going to ask that, have you noticed, I mean, obviously there's historical tensions between blue collar fossil fuel workers and environmentalists, but there have also been lots of moments where they've come together and fought together for the health of the communities. Have you noticed a lot of that happening here, or?
I mean, I certainly see it happening some. There certainly are hunters and fishermen and, a lot of people who are from the Appalachian area and, not people who you would see and think that person looks like an environmentalist,
right.
but who really are becoming really concerned with these issues. People who, live in places like Sardis, Ohio, who are really concerned about climate change and are thinking about putting solar panels on their houses. I think that a lot of people, despite all the propaganda that's out there to tell them otherwise, are starting to see that this is an issue that's going to impact all of us, and it's going to impact their children and grandchildren.
Yeah, because I found that, I mean, I feel like this whole push to protect these wild areas would be stronger, or will be stronger, once different groups with different backgrounds come together. And I found that when communities who are from completely different backgrounds work together, they learn to overcome their differences and
Sure.
work in solidarity with each other, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's really important to find commonalities and work with people who aren't necessarily coming from the same place you are, but want the same thing in the end. And
Sure.
I think we have to be mindful of how our backgrounds and our different privileges might shape what we think of as being an environmentalist, and understand where other people are coming from. Not everyone can afford to necessarily buy the most eco-friendly products all the time, or put solar panels on their house, but there are a lot of people who are doing what they can within their means. And I think we also need to get away from looking so much at conscious consumerism as the solution. I think what we really need to do is hold these companies that are destroying our environment accountable, and hold our politicians accountable. I think we need to take the emphasis off shaming people for not living up to this standard of what we consider to be eco-friendly, and be more inclusive.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of, whether it's a valid sort of assumption or not, I feel like that's where a lot of people's frustrations come when it comes with environmental movement as a whole. Is there's this impression, whether or not it's true, that it's just people looking down on other people, telling them that they're not acting in the right way. And I feel like so often we focus too much on individual actions instead of the broader. Even among so just to bring it back to the whole outdoor recreation thing, there's, if you said that a hiker shouldn't pollute in the forest or litter, that's a completely uncontroversial statement. But when you talk about what a company should do in a forest and what their impact should be, suddenly there's controversy.
Right.
And I think a lot of that comes from this focus on individuality and individual actions. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know, it's obviously still a problem when someone litters, and it's annoying to find trash in a fire pit when you're camping, but it's also if somebody breaks a few rules here and there, that impact is so much smaller than what this could be.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think part of that is that it's just easier to point a finger at a powerless individual than at a big multinational corporation.
For sure, yeah. And I also sometimes wonder if some of these divisions are brought about in order to prevent any meaningful action from happening.
I think that's very astute.
For sure. Well, yeah, I don't know. I think you had mentioned before that there was some recent news, or
yeah. So this leasing has been going on for a while, and one of the biggest concerns about it is that the Wayne National Forest Resource Management Plan is outdated, that it does not take into consideration the impacts of unconventional fracking, because it was created with only vertical fracking in mind. And the U.S. Forest Service has just announced that they are going to update the forest management plan.
Okay.
So that's actually a really big deal, because it could go either way. It could, turn into fewer protections for Wayne National Forest. But if there's enough public engagement, it could go our way. It could go towards more protection. It could be, I don't think it's likely, but it could be no leasing for fracking at all. It could be, less logging. It could be, more, I don't know, maybe even designations of more future old forest areas, things like that, things where, we're looking into the future and saying we want this area to be here for future generations, and we want it to be better than it is now.
Before we get more into that, out of curiosity, what are your impressions of people's attitudes within the Forest Service? I feel like it could go either way, and my assumption is that forest rangers or people who are working for them might be more sympathetic to trying to keep fracking out, but people higher up might, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's accurate or not, but
I haven't pressed anyone who I've spoken to at the office for their opinion. That in my experience, the people who answer the phone at the Wayne National Forest headquarters are very pleasant and friendly and helpful. Yeah. But the forest supervisor, Tony Scardina, who I've not met personally, but he has been pretty supportive of the leasing. So that's an area of frustration. We'd like to see someone who, has, the U.S. Forest Service has a motto, care for the land, serve the people.
Right.
And we feel very strongly that that's not what they're doing right now. Right. So, it's frustrating to see things like Tony Scardina writing op-eds in the Columbus Dispatch about how this is good for the community. And, the regional forester in Milwaukee for the Eastern States Division could stop this. Her name's Kathleen Atkinson, and we have her phone number on our website if anyone would like to give her a call, perhaps on the 22nd when the next auction is happening, and let her know that, this is not what people want. This isn't what we want done with our forest, and we, are frustrated that the U.S. Forest Service isn't doing more to protect the area.
Well, I mean, that brings a good point, which is how can people get involved? You mentioned calling her on the 22nd.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, the first public meeting about the forest management plan update is on the 21st, the day before the auction, and it's being held at the Canal Winchester Community Center from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So I strongly encourage anyone who's concerned about this issue, whether you have something to say or you just want to learn more about what's happening, please show up to that meeting if you can, because the more people come and participate, the more likely it is that we'll be able to make positive changes happen.
Awesome.
I would also encourage people to get involved in other ways if they can. On April 14th, we are having a BioBlitz in the Marietta unit of Wayne National Forest. We strongly encourage people to come out and participate.
Is that where interested. What is that exactly like?
So we are actually working with the Evolution and Ecology Grad Students Club at Ohio State.
Okay.
And we are going to get a bunch of people who are experts on identifying species, but also just a bunch of people from the community who want to go out and enjoy the forest and learn more about the natural areas. To go out, and there's an app called iNaturalist. It's a free app that you can download. Yeah, it's actually really cool. You can just take photos of whatever you see, be it a mushroom or a squirrel or a bird or a tree. You upload the photo, and the app will actually make suggestions about what the species is. But you can leave it blank and wait for someone with more expertise to identify it, or you can kind of take a guess, and then someone will either confirm what it is or be like, no, it's actually this. And once it gets enough data, enough people saying that it's a certain thing, it will be considered a research grade identification.
Okay.
And so, it's a way for more people to get out and learn more about the wildlife in the area, but it's also a way to possibly come away with some data that will be useful, because right now the U.S. Forest Service is saying that there are no endangered species in the Marietta unit of the Wayne National Forest, and a lot of people think that that's probably not actually true and that there's just no one looking for them. So, it would be pretty great if we did come away with evidence that there are some there.
And are they also trying to see how these species will be impacted, or how they are being impacted by any sort of...
right now we're just kind of looking for what species are present, but, we certainly are working with other groups who have information about how they have been and can be impacted in the future by these activities.
Okay, that's really cool. No, I love, identifying wild mushrooms and stuff, so...
Yeah, well, you should come out.
Yeah. When is that again?
April 14th.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're meeting at Leith Run, and that's one of the bigger recreation areas in the Marietta unit. It's right off of Route 7 near New Matamoras.
Okay. So what about people outside of Ohio? I know there's certain states that are dealing with similar issues. Pennsylvania for sure. Colorado, I think. But if someone isn't from the state, what would you suggest they do?
Well, every time there's an auction, there's a protest period for it. So anyone who's concerned about protecting the Wayne National Forest from these leases can write a letter to the Bureau of Land Management protesting the auction. The protest period just ended for the upcoming auction, but these auctions are held quarterly, so there will likely be another one in June and one in September and one in December. So it's usually 2 months before the auction date, a protest period begins, and it lasts for about a month. So during that period, people can either mail or fax a letter explaining why they believe this shouldn't go forward. So that's that's like an actual official option for people to give feedback to the Bureau of Land Management about these leases.
It's like an actual thing that the state.
That the Bureau of Land Management federally. But you can certainly contact them even if it's not a protest period. You can contact the Eastern States Division of the Bureau of Land Management. You can contact the Eastern States Division of the U.S. Forest Service. You can contact the Wayne National Forest headquarters in Nelsonville. You can contact your legislators. Sherrod Brown, for example, I think that if he heard from more people...
He sort of is like on the fence about this, right? Because
he has not taken a stand, which I do find a little frustrating.
I wonder if that's because he tries to support workers and he sees that
I think that is a part of it. I mean, as long as people are looking at this as something that's going to come and save them, I think, they might not vote for someone who is against it. But, I think it's really the job of our politicians to lead this discussion. I think that, they need to be the ones getting out there and showing people that we have other options. It can't just be, fear of something being unpopular. We'll never get anywhere that way.
For sure. Do you have any final thoughts before we end? Or you're fine.
I just really hope that more people will consider getting involved. We have a website. It's keepwaynewild.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So, I strongly encourage people to reach out if they're interested in getting involved. We're always looking for more volunteers. If people would like to buy a t-shirt, we do have t-shirts. They look like this. And you can also make donations through the PayPal on our website. We really appreciate any support people can give us, whether it's just showing up to an event or making a phone call or making a donation, anything people can do to keep this moving forward. And just spread the word about what's happening, I think, is really what we're hopeful for. And I also wanted to mention we are a co-sponsor this year of the Heartwood Forest Council, which is a regional gathering of forest protectors that happens every year. And this year it's going to be in Western Pennsylvania with a focus on Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. So I strongly encourage people who are interested in protecting forests in this region to make it out there if they can, because I think it's going to be a really great event with a lot of really awesome people who are working on this issue, and a lot of people from around the region who have actually won some of these battles in the past and know a lot about how to strategize.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Let us know what you thought in the comments, and also let us know if you have any suggestions for other guests we can have on our podcast. Be sure to give the video a like if you're watching on YouTube, and consider joining our Patreon community. Again, you get lots of access to behind-the-scenes commentaries, bloopers, all sorts of weekly live streams and weekly updates and other fun stuff. It's a party going on there, and it's quite a bit of fun. But either way, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support, and have a nice day.